Hi, I'm Stephanie Gilmore, Curator of Collections here at the Colorado Railroad Museum. Today, as part of our Small Wonders video program, I'm going to share artifacts from our collection that relate to time. You may or may not know it, but our current system of time zones throughout the world originated with the railroad. Today, we know that if it's 6:30 a.m. in San Francisco, it's 7:30 in Denver and 8:30 in New Orleans. No matter where one is in the world, the minute and the second are the same thanks to this standardized system of time. But prior to the onset of the railroad, each town would have kept its own local time. Therefore, theoretically, it could have been 6:32 in Denver when it was only 6:17 in Salt Lake City. This wasn't really an issue when people were traveling between towns via horse and carriage. However, when the railroads came along, how could you know exactly when the train was to arrive? Furthermore, how could train conductors prevent accidents if they were using clocks on different times? Without standardized time, it was entirely possible for a train to leave one town at 6:15, travel for 20 minutes, and arrive at the next town only at 6:28. As you can imagine, this was not only very confusing, but also quite dangerous. To alleviate these problems, standard time was established in the United States and Canada on November 18, 1883 at 12 noon. Even though standardized time was officially established, the American public was quite resistant to it, and therefore towns often kept their local time in addition to the railroad time. Therefore, if one were traveling by train, they would need to consult the railroad time clock and not the local time in order to catch their train. It would be several more years before standardized time was actually made into law on March 19, 1918. At the Colorado Railroad Museum, we have many artifacts that relate to timekeeping. I'll highlight just a few of them for you today. First is this beautiful Seth Thomas wall clock. Seth Thomas was a very famous American clockmaker who incorporated his business in Connecticut in 1853. This clock was actually used in the Master Mechanic's office located in Como, Colorado. We know it was used there until at least 1917, so the clock itself is at least 103 years old. After it left Como, it was used in various Colorado and Southern Mechanical Department offices before it was finally donated to the Colorado Railroad Museum sometime in the mid-20th century. It was donated by Fred Downing and R.E. Carleton, both of whom worked for the Colorado and Southern Railroad. Fred Downing was a clerk for the Colorado and Southern, while R.E. Carleton was a car foreman. According to these men, the clock was used by South Park Division crews to check their watches. Today, this clock lives in the Richardson Library here at the museum, and as you can see, it is still working and keeping perfect time. Next, we have this pocket watch, which is a Waltham brand watch. Founded in 1850, the Waltham Watch Company aimed to be the first watch company to manufacture its watches using machines. At that time, all watches were handmade. Waltham was ultimately successful in creating watches using machines. The company changed hands and went through lots of different financial troubles leading up to the Civil War. Then, after the Civil War, the Waltham Model 1870 Crescent Street watch was the first American watch designed and marketed specifically as a railroad watch. The watch in our collection was purchased by Harry E. Raines when he was hired as a fireman for the Denver and Rio Grande in 1905. He carried it with him daily until his death in 1953. This watch is known as a 23-jewel pocket watch, which means that it has 23 parts made of jewels, usually rubies. Rubies and other jewels were and still are used in watches to prevent or reduce friction between the surfaces of moving metal parts within a watch. Although there are watches with varying numbers of jeweled parts, this does not add to the value of the watch. In spite of this, watches with at least 23 jewels were considered railroad grade due to the belief that they kept the best time since they had the least amount of friction between their parts. Today, watches are still made using jeweled parts, but they're often synthetic jewels. Next, we have a collection of timetables from the library. Timetables show the route of the train as well as the times it will arrive and depart stations along its route. The earliest timetables were actually printed in the local newspaper alongside advertisements of what was along the route. Merging of various railroads resulted in larger systems and more complex routes, which ultimately created a need for multi-page booklets. Not only were these booklets conveniently separate from the newspaper, but they also easily fit into pockets or bags that travelers carried with them on their journey. By the beginning of the 20th century, timetables became standardized in size, measuring about 4 inches by 9 inches, which allowed for easy transport as well as easy display in racks at stations. Each railroad developed their own fonts, color schemes, and designs so that their timetables were distinctive. Timetables would be designed to match travel posters and would advertise landmarks along the route. By 1880, more than 93,000 miles of track had been laid in the United States, a number which doubled by 1900. So naturally, there was a need for accurate timetables for all those different tracks managed by different companies. Another interesting collection that is similar to the timetables is our collection of official railway guides. The official guides were published monthly through the year, and they served as a one-stop shop for information on railroads and other modes of transportation. Not only do they contain timetables for the railroads, but they also have information about steamships and, in later years, airlines. These guides often contain transportation information for the United States, Canada, and Mexico. They include route maps, timetables, advertisements, connecting coach information, descriptions of railcar accommodations, indexes of railway stations, mileages of track, and much, much more. With these guides, a traveler could take a cross-country train trip using many different routes and companies and still have all of the information they would need for their journey in one place. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will see you next time when we explore more of our fascinating artifact collections.
Like, comment, share, and subscribe. Commenting and sharing in particular may qualify as virtual engagements for important funding programs like the SCFD.